The sound of drums and chants filled the air as the Alaafin, adorned in his regal attire, led the procession through the streets of Oyo during the Orun Festival. His attendants followed closely behind, each one chosen for their loyalty and skills. At the entrance to the Orum shrine stood the Bashorun, a revered figure akin to the hand of the king. This position held immense power, overseeing both military and political affairs within the vast territories of Oyo. From the hills of Ekiti and Ondo to the northern Nupe kingdoms and west to the powerful Dahomey kingdom, the Bashorun played a crucial role in the rise and expansion of Oyo Empire. Today, we delve into the influential figure and their impact on Oyo's history. King's Bash. Iku Baba Yeye, Alashe Keji Orisha, the one who brings death, father of all, my lord, second only to the gods. King's Bash. Baba mio, Omo Oromia, Omo Odudua, Mo sumo níwọ̀n ẹgbẹ̀je, mo jìnnà sí ọba níwọ̀n ẹgbẹ̀fà. Ẹ ṣe kábíyèsí fún Alaafin o. My great father, descended directly from Oromia, son of Odudua. For every 6 steps I take towards His Majesty, I take 7 away. Hail him, Kábíyèsí. The appearance of him, His Imperial Majesty, the Alaafin, was an event filled with grandeur and splendor. Every time he stepped foot in public, all activities came to a halt, and everyone stopped what they were doing to pay their respect. Whether he was in court or out in town, every chieftain was expected to bow before him and join his entourage as he made his way through the city until he returned to his palace. The arrival of His Imperial Majesty, the Alaafin, was a sight to behold, filled with pomposity and extravagance. The energy in the air buzzed with excitement as people eagerly awaited his presence. His entourage was vast and intimidating, and his aura commanded awe and respect. His voice was considered too valuable for commoners, so they learned of his wishes and demands through intermediaries. All of these opulence served to reinforce his status as a king among kings, a ruler who received homage but did not bestow it upon others, except from the gods, the heavens, and their Bashorun. For over 400 years, the Oyo Empire stood as the largest and most powerful of the Yoruba kingdoms. From the early 14th century to the early 19th century, its cavalry ravaged and plundered enemy kingdoms with ease, while its dominance in commerce and slavery remained unrivaled in West Africa. But beyond these feats, the empire's greatest strength lay in its sophisticated form of democracy. With checks and balances, legitimate authority from the people, separation of powers, and a social contract between ruler and governed, Oyo's governance system was ahead of its time. The descendants of Oromia established a structure that ensured balance of power, supremacy of the law, and separation of authority. all to ensure that rule remained in the hands of the free people of Oyo. How did they maintain this system, ensuring that their king of all kings, the Alaafin, could not abuse his power? The unwritten constitution of the Oyo people was the bedrock of the Alaafin's legitimacy and the basis of the power balancer. These traditions and lived rules were guarded by the Oyo Mesi, who in turn were governed by the Ogboni, a secretive society of elders who were responsible for upholding traditional values and customs. They were selected by the people. Ultimately, the people held the reins of the empire. After all, Ajisebi Oyo Lari, Oyo Shebi Baba Eni Kankan. It is always said we learn from Oyo. Oyo never imitates anyone. The Council of the Oyo Mesi. The Oyo Mesi, a council of 7 chiefs and priests, held immense power in the kingdom. Led by the Bashorun, they checked the authority of the Alaafin and acted as his advisors on state matters. They also had the responsibility of raising the citizens' army to defend the kingdom. In extreme cases, such as with the tyrannical Alaafin Karan, who was rumored to have eaten human flesh, or Alaafin Odarawu, who ordered a town to be wiped out over a decades-old grudge against a market woman, the Oyo Mesi had the authority to depose the king through the edicts and machinations of the hand of the king, the Bashorun. This often resulted in the Alaafin committing suicide. His Supernal Highness, the Bashorun, was the leader and most powerful member of the Oyo Mesi, and he, like every member of the Oyo Mesi, was appointed from a noble family by the Alaafin to their office and continued to carry out their functions independent of the influence of the Alaafin. The Oyo Mesi consisted of the Bashorun, a contraction of the phrase Iba Bashorun, which translates to the Lord in charge of the Orun Festival. His Supernal Highness was king to the heavens, as the Alaafin was king of the earth. He was the most powerful member of the Oyo Mesi. The Agba King, the High Priest of Orun, a title hereditary within a single lineage. The Samu, the Sacrificial Minister, a title hereditary within a single lineage. He was in charge of all religious activities, whilst also being equally important in all secular matters. The Alaafin, the High Priest of Egungun, the masquerade, which was the earthly manifestation of the ancestral spirits, a title which was hereditary within a single lineage. He was also in charge of all religious activities, while also being equally important in all secular matters. The Laguna, the state's roving ambassador. His role was to represent the state in critical times. This title is also hereditary within a single lineage. The Akiniku, the Chief of Defense Staff, who had an important role to play in the burial rites of the Alaafin. This title is hereditary within a single lineage. The Ashikba, Mayor of the capital, played the role of the junior, as his office was the last to be added to the Oyo Mesi, hereditary within a single lineage that is descended from the ancestral rulers of Agoja, the town that eventually became the present Oyo. The Bashorun, as Prime Minister, oversaw the affairs at court, and most importantly, he was the Oshorun, Iba Bashorun, Lord of the Heavenly Mysteries. To chants of Karaoleo Iba, which means "Live long, Your Majesty," he emerged as the badges praised him to the rhythm of talking drums. His Supernal Highness, in glory, in sync, the manifest person of their words. They said, Oluwa mi Oshorun, my lord, the Oshorun, Ọba Orun, the King Celestial. Nlekabo, welcome, your majesty. Kara oleo, long live my lord. Iba kara ole, they chorused as he took his seat at the epicenter of the Kobe, basking in the admiration of his people, with all eyes on him. During the Orun Festival, the Alaafin himself had to humble himself before the Bashorun. At that time of the year, Obaye, the king terrestrial, had to pay his respect and be examined by the Orun, the king celestial. The air was heavy with anticipation as the Alaafin knelt before the Bashorun, his heart pounding in his chest. The clay coffin loomed ominously beside them, a stark reminder of the gravity of the moment. The Bashorun's eyes bore into the king, reading his every movement, every flicker of emotion. Silence enveloped the sacred space as the Bashorun began the divination process, casting the kola nuts upon the ground and interpreting their pattern with a practiced eye. The Alaafin held his breath, his entire being focused on the outcome that would seal his fate. Minutes stretched into eternity, until finally the Bashorun spoke, his voice resonating with authority that the gods granted additional year to the Alaafin's rule. Relief flooded through the Alaafin as he bowed his head in gratitude. The emblem of the ritual is a clay coffin, a reminder of his coming apotheosis, his ascent into the vaults of heaven, as the death of a king is usually described in Yoruba kingdoms. The elders will say Obati Waja, which meant His Majesty has transcended the earthly realm and has entered into the vaults of the sky. As the Alaafin was a sacred being, his death was not simply an end to a life, but a relocation to heavenly realms. Aside from the coffin, items like kola nuts were also used in the ritual. The reverence of this event lies in the purpose of the Orun Festival, which is when the Alaafin would take a moment to solemnly connect with the gods and contemplate his rule. It was also a time when the Bashorun could hold the king accountable in front of the divine beings. As the head and most powerful member of the Oyo Mesi, he oversaw the process of selecting a new king from the unusually very long list of eligible princes. It also was his responsibility to inform Ile-Ife of the death of an Alaafin, following which he would be appointed the regent till a new king is elected. Shunning any prince known for his excesses and cruelty, the choice of the new king often was a poor prince, plying his trade with no desire for the throne, who is then sent under a false pretext and humiliated as a test for his character. If he passed, he would then be crowned, or in certain cases, after the reign of Alaafin Atiba, when the Aremo, which is the crown prince, no longer had to die with the king. The Bashorun had the power to confirm or reject the Aremo if he proved too cruel. A decision which would demand the Aremo retires to a small town outside Oyo where he must remain. This particular role was one that certain Bashoruns excelled at, whilst others, like Gar, exploited it for their selfish desires. As kingmaker, the unwritten constitution allowed him to depose a tyrannical king and together with the Oyo Mesi reject the king, which would result in the ritual suicide of the king. The Bashorun was responsible for raising and commanding the citizens' army on behalf of the Alaafin to prosecute war at his behest. The citizens' army, its structure, commanders, and how it related to the Areono Kakanfo will be discussed in later episodes. Bashorun Yamba, the great-grandfather of Bashorun Gar, was one of the most famous and feared Bashoruns in Yoruba history. So great was his fame that the Dahomians, known for their powerful female warriors, were rumored to have set fire to their city and retreat into the forest for fear of Yamba. During the reign of Alaafin Ajago, Yamba, together with the first ever Areona Kakanfo, Kokoro Ganga, expanded the Oyo Empire to Dahomey and the Popo lands and fostered peace during their reign. A sharp contrast to his infamous great-grandson, Bashorun Gar, a despotic tyrant whose excesses made future Alaafin not to only be weary of the Oyo Mesi and the Bashorun, but to also defang the institution and make it a glorified rubber stamp. The Bashorun, as a lord of the court, was responsible to his sovereign on special occasions and festivals such as the Bere Festival, which was celebrated in June. It was the Yoruba New Year. This festival was celebrated as a harvest feast of the Bere grass, an ubiquitous grass that grew only in the savannah. The nature of the grass allowed it to be used both for ornamental purposes and for construction. During this festival, the Bashorun opened the festival by performing the Bakuduri and closed it by performing the Jelekpa. And should the Alaafin live long enough to celebrate the royal jubilee, the Bashorun was to follow immediately with his Owara. The title of Bashorun was hereditary, though not necessarily from father to son. This title was the birthright of 5 noble families of common ancestry. The oldest and by far the most powerful was the Ogun lineage, which produced Bashoruns like Yamba, the conqueror of Dahomey, the infamous Bashorun Gar, Yamba's great-grandson, and also Oluyole of Ibadan, to mention a few. The other families included Aga, Ese, and Aye lineages. It was the prerogative of the Alaafin to entrust this sacred office of the Bashorun or the Iba Oshorun, Lord of the heavenly mysteries, to whichever eligible noble he deemed worthy. The Oyo Empire lasted between the early 14th century to the early 19th century, during which time it fought many battles, expanding its reach till its peak in the time of Alaafin Abiodun. Its decline began in the reign of Alaafin Awole, who undermined the Oyo Mesi, grew tyrannical, and caused chaos in the land, which spurred rebellions, raids, and the subsequent collapse of the Oyo Empire. While Alaafin Awole is often blamed for undermining the unwritten constitution and bringing about an era of chaos, it should however not be forgotten that it was Bashorun Gar's excesses which made subsequent Alaafins after Abiodun, including Awole himself, weary of the Oyo Mesi and made them keep the council permanently under their thumbs, so by losing the checks and balances and separation of power, which made the Bashorun a major counterweight to the powers of the Alaafin. Kings became tyrannical, government became chaotic, and the influence of the once great empire, its army, especially the citizens' army, dwindled and resulted in the collapse of the Oyo Empire. We would leave you with these questions to ponder. Number 1. The Oyo Empire's political system was ahead of its time, with a monarchy exhibiting democratic tenets, checks and balances on the king's power. How different do you think this was compared to other kingdoms and empire of the 14th to 19th century? Number 2. If you were taken back to the reign of the Oyo Empire, what position would you want to hold? The Alaafin, the Bashorun, a member of the Oyo Mesi, Ogboni, or maybe even a member of the citizens' army? And why? Number 3. What are your thoughts on how power and authority were shared among the Alaafin, the nobles, cults, and citizens in the Oyo Empire? And how might such a system work or not work in today's world? Number 4. The Oyo Empire eventually fell, partly due to the Oyo Mesi losing its ability to check and balance the Alaafins. Why do you think balance in power is important for a stable government? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and thumbs up to stay updated on our next episodes. Thank you for staying with us this far. See you in our next video.